I'm Brian Briscoe, host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. And this is a first deal episode where we walk through what it takes for someone to find, fund, and close on their first apartment complex. And if you're an aspiring investor yourself, you are probably trying to do exactly the same thing. So before we get to this episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button below and the little notification bell to make sure you get notified every single time we post a new episode. And now, enjoy the show. What advice would you give an aspiring investor that's trying to get their first deal closed?
What worked for me ended up being networking, right? It's about kind of making sure you know what your strengths are and what you bring to the table. And it's hard when you're new because you're new. You don't necessarily have specialized skill set in fundraising or analyzing or anything. So it's just be in the game and surround yourself with people who are like-minded, because it encourages you, it keeps you going. Like I said, I mean, I was shopping for years and I could have given up. And I think the big reason is that I networked and I just was motivated by the energy.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. Very excited for today's show, bringing on a friend, somebody I've known for a couple of years now. We're going to do a first deal episode, but it's actually a first and second deal episode. So today we're talking with Alex Escobar. Alex, welcome to the show.
So much, Brian. I'm really excited to be here. It's it's kind of cool to be on this side of it. I've listened to your show pretty much since the beginning, man. So it's really cool.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Yeah, and we've known each other for quite a while. It's fun getting to hear you talk about this, and I'm really excited. So let's start out with this. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, what's your background and how did you get into apartment investing?
Okay. Well, my dad was an entrepreneur, right? And so very early on, I remember maybe I was like 17, 16 years old. He bought me the Carlton Sheets real estate investing,
the one that used to be on late night TV. Yes.
Yeah. So that was kind of the first introduction, and I actually remember watching the videos and being like, wow, this will be cool someday when I'm grown. I'm just a kid. I'm not I'm not there yet, and I was just focused on making it to the NBA at that point. But that was kind of the first bug that kind of put real estate investing on my radar. I grew up, got a job, got my MBA, did all this stuff. And then eventually I came back to the US after being abroad. I had a nonprofit that I started with some friends. And when I came back to the US and I got a government job in DC, and it was great. It was something that is a job that a lot of people would kill for. It was a job in international development at the US Agency for International Development.
Nice.
And it was doing very meaningful work, and I was, really motivated by it and everything. It was really good. But at the same time, I always had that entrepreneurial thing inside. I always knew that wouldn't be my kind of forever destiny. So I was really thankful for the job I had, but at the same time, I knew I wanted more. I wanted something different. Yeah. And I remember it started when I first got passed over for a promotion. I said, no hard feelings. I get it. Yeah. But I still wanted a promotion. And so I went out and got it myself. I got my real estate license. And I started selling houses on the side, did all that stuff. And I was making extra money. I was paying off my student loans. I was doing all this good stuff. And I was feeling really good about myself. And I did that for years, honestly. And my plan was essentially do real estate as an agent, so that I can grow in knowledge and skills, so that eventually I can become that real estate investor when I had money, when I had that extra income. In the meantime, I was still doing deals as a real estate agent on the side while I was doing my 9-to-5 and diving into my education on real estate, bigger pockets, books, and all that stuff. And eventually I came across this book on real estate investing called Financial Freedom with Real Estate Investing, and it's all about apartments.
That's the Michael Blanc one, right?
Correct. Yep. Got it. I remember I'm a slow reader, but I read it in 4 hours on a 4-hour bus ride from visiting, from one city to another in Honduras, just visiting some family. And I said, wow, here's all these things that he says you should do. And as a realtor, I'm already doing a big chunk of these things. I already had a database. I'm already communicating with them about real estate. For whatever it's worth, I was seen as a real estate expert, at least with some of these people. And how hard would it be to say, hey, if you need to buy a house, call me. If you need to sell a house, call me. If you're considering investing in real estate, call me.
Call me. Yeah.
And I started to kind of just have these conversations with my network. I was just really excited about it. I said, I can do this.
Yeah.
And I had never considered something this big of apartments. I always thought flip a house here and there, and that was it. And so I saw this roadmap. I started to follow it. And very quickly, I was really encouraged. I had $600,000 of soft commitments, which is, people saying, hey, yeah, if you find a deal that looks this good, I'll give you 100, I'll give you $200,000. And it was not hard. And I was like, okay, then, and I just extrapolated. If I have $600,000, which I didn't really have, but I had these promises, then I can go out and buy a bigger building. And maybe this will be my entrepreneurial venture, which is something that I've always known that I've wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of got me into this real estate investing world. We'll leave it there for now, because I know.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot more in detail about some of the specifics, but before we do, a question I ask everybody on the show, and part of the reason I ask is because I kind of dabbled with real estate, and it wasn't until I found my own why that I really was able to get a lot of traction, and I credit that big burning why that I had to a lot of what I was able to do later. But what is your big burning why for doing this?
I'll say that it's a combination of things, right? And one of them is obviously the freedom. And I'll kind of tie it back to my youth, which is I was very carefree. I was spoiled, for lack of a better word, right? I had all the opportunity in the world, and I just didn't need to worry about money ever, really, until my adulthood. And I remember how liberating that was. I remember how I had all these creative and all these other things. So there was part of it is just, I want that freedom. I want that freedom back that I once felt, right? The other part is connected now to the fact that my first deal came, I got the phone call 2 weeks before the birth of my first child. And so, there's one line in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is, a lot of real estate investors really love that book, and I'm one of them. There's one line in there where he talks about how some people will use the fact that they have a child as an excuse and say, oh, I can't take risks. I can't do these things because I have a child. And some other people will say, I must do these things because I have a child.
Yeah.
And so I really feel like setting an example and also obviously providing is a big part of that for me. So because I have this child, I want her to experience this other path in life.
And since you brought that up, I've been on both sides of that coin. I think the first opportunity, most people know I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, but my first opportunity to get out, the reason that I stayed in and I didn't do something real estate related or more entrepreneurial or more what I wanted was because I had 2 kids and I needed the stable income is what I thought. But my reason for getting out was because I wasn't seeing my kids enough. And I had to build a multifamily business so that I could spend more time with those kids. So I was at different points in my life, I was on both sides of that coin. One was before I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and one of them was many years after. But yeah, I've used my kids as an excuse to, cling to the W-2 job. And I've used my kids as the excuse to liberate myself. So good excuse.
All about perspective. Yeah.
Perspective. Yeah. So, well, cool. So let's go a little bit into the real estate journey, dive a little deeper. What were some of the challenges you had getting started in multifamily?
Okay. So, like I said, I read this book and I think it's very common with a lot of these books. It's like, oh yeah, you do this, step 1, 2, 3, and then you're successful. And the devil's in the details. There's all these challenges along the way. So I had my roadmap of what I needed to do, step 1, step 2, step 3. And like I said, I felt like I was already on step 3. Like I had step 1 and 2, I had my network, I had some credibility with them.
Yep.
And I was already kind of had these soft commitments where I felt, okay, now I have some money in the bank, which I didn't, but then I said, okay, now I can go out and shop. And I extrapolated and I said, okay, any deal under 2 million, I think I could take down with this amount of soft commitments. And I went out and shopped and negotiated and analyzed. And I shopped and analyzed and negotiated. And I did that for 2 years. And, you know, the closest I came was a break-even deal where if everything went well, I would make $0. And it wasn't a good deal. So I couldn't move forward on anything. I just wasn't making progress. I was really frustrated. One thing I also want to say is that this whole time while I was shopping and analyzing and negotiating, I was actively still getting educated. I was still listening to podcasts like this one.
Yep.
And one thing I would do is actually follow up with the people, the guests on the podcast, because everyone has some sort of, hey, you know, here's my website.
Yeah.
You know, and I would actually call them or email them and say, hey, you know, could you give me 20 minutes? You know, I just wanted to connect. And I would actually do that. And I connected with some people who were doing this at a very high level. And I was hoping, oh, you know, like maybe I could come in and mop the floors for them, or I could come in and do something and just kind of be friends with these people and learn. And I didn't know what would happen, but
you're putting yourself out there, and that's and you're learning from people. And here's a secret that a lot of people don't realize is that there's two types of people. There's a type of people that go on podcasts, and there's a type that don't. You know, the type that go on podcast want to be contacted. That's why they go on podcasts. And, you know, I was always reluctant to reach out to people. And I think one of the biggest turning points in my journey was that I heard on a podcast, it was Michael Blanc's podcast, that, you know, really, you know, I'm like, man, there's a lot of similarities between what he's doing, what he did, and what I want to do. And I reached out to him, and that was one of those turning points for me. But anyway, to people listening, you know, Alex and I both, you know, realize this, but reach out to people, you know. So if something Alex says, you know, hits you and strikes a chord, reach out to him.
Oh yeah. And I'll say that exactly happened, right? Like one of these people who was at a very high level. I remember, you know, you get the 20-minute call, and I had my kind of prepared questions of what I wanted to ask him. And I said, okay, well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you for your time. Goodbye. You know, and he said, wait, Alex, you know, let me ask you some questions. And he actually took it a step further than anyone that I had talked to before. And I mean, I felt just so encouraged by that call that, you know, it was someone who kind of reached through the phone and just kind of put his hand on my shoulder. He's like, you're going in the right direction. You're going to be successful, and I'm going to help you get there.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, that blew me away. Like I'd never had that kind of mentorship by someone who was at that level. And so that relationship stayed in place, but we ended up not, you know, he was at another, he didn't need me at that point, but it was still just really nice. And it was something that they were giving value to me, and I was struggling. I was like, how can I give value to someone on this level, you know? Yeah. And the truth is, I don't feel like I've given adequate value, right? But the point is that I kind of took their advice and I kept going. So that specific person, I told him, hey, I've been shopping for 2 years and I'm pretty frustrated. You know, I don't know what's going on. Yeah. And he said 2 things for me. He said, keep doing what you're doing. You're on the right track. Focus more on networking. That's where you're going to make your breakthrough. And so I just did what he said, and I just kept doing it. I joined a community of other investors. And what I did is I looked in that big community of people, and I just said, hey, who's in the DC area? Let's meet in person. And I just started calling people and just saying, hey, if you're in town, let's try to connect. And necessarily and I wasn't asking people to get married with me right away, but I was just saying, hey, you know, let's connect, let's see what you're talking about. And we're building relationships. And like I said, this is maybe a year or 9 months later, you know, right before my baby was born, I got the call from one of these people that I had connected with, and we had kept in touch. And he said, Alex, I got a great deal. Do you want to help me raise money for it? And I said, I'm interested, but I
Yep.
got this
Yep.
event coming up. And he said, it's good. It's a sweetheart deal. Think it over. Here's some information. Get back to me.
Yep.
And it was, that was the first deal. And what was good about it is it was someone who was more experienced than me, but he was maybe 2 steps ahead of me instead of 10 steps ahead of me.
Yeah.
He was at a point where I could still actually contribute meaningfully to the work and to the venture. And so it was really a match made in heaven. So
and that's kind of typical. It's something I've noticed. I mean, we talked about this before we hit the record button, but the bigger the gap between two people, the harder it is for a real value relationship to come out of it. It's not impossible. I mean, there are ways that you can add value to people who are 90 steps ahead of you. But I see more and more frequently people latching on to people who are 3 and 5 steps ahead of you, 1 or 2 deals ahead, and they're just trying to scale or trying to reach the next level. And it's like, okay, I think I see that a lot more frequently than, hey, this guy's got 2,000 units. He's going to bring you on as a full partner. That doesn't happen a whole lot. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it doesn't happen a whole lot.
Yeah. And, at least in my case, it worked out. It's someone who, and we have complementary skill sets, right? He's a lot more in the construction side, and I'm much more on kind of these investor relations and marketing and that kind of thing. So it really is working out very well. And so that's how I got into that first deal.
Nice. So let's talk briefly about the 26 unit, and then we'll launch into the 64. So, so you said that he called you up, wanted you to partner with him, and part of the reason he wanted you to partner was to raise capital. Take it from there. Talk about getting into the deal, the capital raising experience, and how it went.
Okay, so like I said, first the baby was born, then there was chaos, no sleep, madness. Then a few, I don't know, maybe a month later, my wife still will hold a grudge. I was on paternity leave, but here's this opportunity I'd been working towards for years. And I said, well, I got to make this happen, So I really dove in. First was my own due diligence on him as a person, on this partner, and on the deal, because he was already a few steps ahead of me in his own due diligence of the property. So I kind of needed to get up to speed and make sure I really believed in him. And I really believed in the deal. And so I asked some hard-hitting questions. I really tore apart like all of his assumptions in his analysis, and really just made sure I was on board. And it, once I really believed in it, then I picked up the phone and started calling and communicating with my network. And so I just hit the phones. And again, like I said before, I had 600,000 in these soft commitments. And our sales price was 600,000 for this deal. It was very small compared to a lot of other syndications. And so we were only going to raise, I think, 300,000, which would be enough to buy the property, and then some capital expenditures to improve it. And all those soft commitments kind of disappeared. And maybe that's normal, but for me, I was kind of, wait, I've been working towards this for years.
Very normal is the answer. It is very normal, and I think because a lot of times it's all hypothetical. You go out to your friends and it's a hypothetical. It's a low pressure. It's like, hey, if this happens, would you? And it's really easy for someone to say yes. And sometimes it's I don't want to disappoint my friend, so I'll just say yes anyway. But it's actually very common for a lot of those soft commits, especially on the first deal, to not pan out, and so that is absolutely common. So anyway, go ahead with the story. But
so that happened, and then we were struggling to make ends meet. Even though my role was primarily to raise money, my partner brought in people from his network, and I was able to bring in people from my network, and we got enough to close the deal. We had to make some adjustments to our business plan, based on a little bit less money overall, but we still, it's still going to be just as good of a deal, if not probably better for our investors, because it's kind of they get bigger pieces of the pie. And then we were able to close, and it was amazing for me, like all these, by this point, it had been a few years of work. And it's just kind of a sweetheart deal. We'll fast forward, and now we're starting to think about our exit for that deal. And so, what I guess I'll say is I just stuck to it, even though those soft commitments dried up. People who hadn't soft committed ended up putting money in, and people who I least expected. It was actually past clients from my real estate who weren't necessarily like very close friends, but they saw me as a professional. I had done a good job as a realtor for them, and they saw my expertise, and they said, "Hey, we can apply that to this." So nice. It worked out really well.
Yeah. Relationships and your personal reputation, especially on the first deal, that's probably the key to raising capital, is leveraging your personal reputation, leveraging your pre-existing relationships. And that's how most people get through the first deal. So so 26 unit, you made it, you closed it, you're operating it, you're looking to come full cycle here soon. How long after this one did the 64 unit come along?
So that one we got under contract just about 6 months later. So that was January 2021. So maybe June or July 2021, we got it under contract. And so, what was cool is, because my partner, his first deal was a 40 unit in that same city of Danville, Virginia. And so he had a few other deals outside of Danville, but then he kind of had this inside track with the property manager. Any deal that kind of came on in Danville, he was going to be one of the first people getting the call, almost that first right of first refusal.
Yeah.
And so, the 26 unit was his second deal in Danville. And again, he just kind of got that call, said, yes, I'll take it right away. And then now his third deal in Danville, my second, was right across the street from our first. Nice. So again, we got this nice inside track where thankfully, we're the first ones in to some of these deals before they get competed, before they get all this stuff. And I guess we've been kind of, wise enough to be able to lock them up before they get out there. And the truth is that they're very good deals. So,
and something that a lot of people don't realize is the property managers can be a very good source for deal flow. Property managers, I mean, if they manage properties, at some point, the owners, if they're thinking about selling, they're going to tell the property managers often before they tell brokers, because it's like, I mean, you know how the game works. You're going to give your T12 up, and people are going to evaluate the property based on the T12. And so it goes like this, owner to property manager, hey, we're going to be selling this property in 6 months. So we need to be super duper efficient at the operations. And so the property managers are like, oh, you're selling, huh? Hey, I'm going to pick up, and so if you let your property manager know, obviously you have to have a deal first, but if you let your property manager know that you're looking for more deals, when something like this pops up, they know to call you. And I think this is what exactly, prime example of it is, they knew to call your partner because they knew he was buying in the area and is interested in buying more. So anyway, that said, you guys got the deal from the property manager. My diatribe is over. I'm getting off my soapbox, and back to you.
Just to add one point to that is we just got another call saying, hey, the other building right down the street is interested if you are. And this is just another one. They actually picked up the phone on our behalf just to make that connection. So it's very true what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. So then now we're on the 64 unit. This is our second deal. And what was cool from my perspective as someone who's primarily focused on the fundraising, obviously I'm very involved in asset management too. I really, after that first deal, I just felt a great sense of gratitude and responsibility with the people who put money and trust in me, right?
Yeah.
And they knew me, especially the people who knew me, who did it because of me and my name. And like you said, my 40 years of life and reputation or whatever, right? And so I really wanted to be very involved in that asset management too, to kind of be hands-on and to be that communicator with these people. And so that's been another part of my role along the way, is to send our regular reports to the investors, to keep them in the loop and to keep them feeling involved in the process.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so with the second one, what was really cool is I felt like I had these months to kind of plan and prepare and communicate. I shared updates on the first deal with people who didn't invest with me, right? I said, hey, we closed it. You know, here's a monthly newsletter. Here, we actually closed it. Hey, things are looking good. Hey, here's what's happening in the city of Danville. You know, there's this development, there's this economic stuff happening. And even when I didn't have a deal, people were asking me questions about it. I'd get phone calls and I'd say, hey, I used to date a girl in Danville. I like that town. If you get another one, let me know. And that stuff happened more frequently in those 6 months than they had in the previous years, just because I had stuff to talk about, right? Stuff to share about. And so when it came time for this raise, it was much easier. Some people had already, given me those new soft commitments, and they actually pulled the trigger this time.
Yeah.
It was nice. And it was, the numbers were more typical, right? This deal was priced at 2.6 million. So that's more of what you'd expect for a syndication, and our raising goal was $1 million. And for me to get my head wrapped around, I struggled to raise $200,000, and now I'm trying to raise $1 million. Again, it's one of those limiting belief questions.
Yeah, it's a mental thing, It's like, shoot, can I really do this? Yeah.
And actually, it's funny, in talking about networking, I was talking with another guy who's very much focused on raising, and he says, oh yeah, smaller deals are actually harder to raise for, and maybe that's been your experience, but he said, oh, anything under 5 million, ooh, it's going to be tough to raise money for that. So who knew? I didn't know that. But yeah, it was very efficient. I had some systems in place by then. We did a little webinar, kind of summarized it, recorded it. Anyone who was interested, I had like a little 1-page summary of what the deal looked like. Here's what our projected returns are. If you invest this much, you'd walk away with this much. Let me know if you're interested. Click here to schedule a call with me. And all those things were a lot more automated. And, it was just a very smooth process, honestly. It was just like, this is how it's supposed to be. It was very rewarding.
And there's something about the deal size. Size does matter to investors. Our first deal was a 55 unit. And I remember talking to a guy that had money to invest. And he's like, I don't invest in anything under 100 units. And it's like, why? He's like, well, this may sound petty, but I like unit count. I like to tell my friends that I invested in a big, large, expensive apartment building, right? But there's other people who have good reasons for the 100+ units, but there's also the perceived risk on the smaller investments. If you're one of 3 investors, it seems to be a riskier thing, and there is some truth to it, but it is often harder to raise for a small property than a large property, which, it's when you're for the new investors, that's something you got to take into account. When you're talking to the people who have invested in several deals before, a lot of times they have their criteria, and a lot of times their criteria will involve, unit count, asset class, or whatever. But yeah, it does tend to be harder on smaller properties. And it's always easier on your second deal because people's perception of you is different. Instead of the realtor trying to get into multifamily, you're now the multifamily guy. And so the people who may have been reluctant the first time around have seen those updates, have seen, oh, he did close in that 24 unit. Oh, hey, look, it is going great. Oh, hey, look, he can do what he was telling us he could do. And then all of a sudden, the checkbooks start coming out.
Yeah, that was my experience. And so, there was some surprises along the way that weren't related to raising money, right? And so that there were some other challenges, but thankfully raising money wasn't one of them for this one. And so, I'll tell you a little bit about some of those challenges. Essentially, this is a smaller city. It's I guess what we'd call a tertiary market, right? So it's a smaller city, and it's in the South, and it's, there's just a different pace of life. And so we had a title company who was, we had kind of, it's a smaller company, and they didn't have a ton of resources to throw at our deal. And as we approached closing, oh, no. First challenge was a lender. And we'll come back to that one.
Yeah.
So the lender, we had a previous relationship with a credit union from a nearby city, and they were interested, and they offered us amazing terms. And time was going by, and the terms were good. They were better than what we had in our analysis and our projections. So we said, okay, maybe it's worth waiting, even if they're a little bit slower. And time kept going, and weeks and months. And eventually, after, I think it was maybe like 3 or 4 months, they came out and they were like, we're not interested anymore. And they dragged, it was very painful. And so, all along, I'm getting phone calls from investors saying, hey, did we close on the deal yet? Did we close on the deal yet? And for, there's only so many times we can say, hey, we're still waiting on the appraisal.
Yeah.
Hey, a month later, hey, we're still waiting on the appraisal. 2 months later, and it's just kind of I felt like a broken record, but I did just want to keep trying to communicate with people and keeping them in the loop. Eventually, we had to scrap them and go and find another lender. And thankfully, this one came through. The terms weren't as favorable, but they did what they said they were going to do, and they moved on it,
Yeah. I think in that case, money's more important than terms, right?
Yeah.
So actually getting the money, especially, I mean, the lender is always the biggest partner, and they're often the biggest pain. And many times, I mean, I've been a general partner on 10 properties now. A lot of times, every single time that we have been pushed past our projected closing date, it's been because of the lender. You're waiting for the lender to get through their processes to finally approve it. And I've had to make that call several times, just like, we're still waiting on the lender. We are still waiting on the lender. We are still waiting on the lender. So,
Okay. So that's reassuring.
Yeah. It's a pain, but it's how things happen.
Yeah. And I'll say also, for the first deal, we were able to get seller financing. So a lot of that stuff we didn't, at least from my perspective, it was my first deal. And it just seemed like it wasn't an event, right? We just had to agree and get to closing. This one, there's all these third parties, or I guess the important third party of the lender. By then as we approach closing, finally, like, we have our lender and everything's kind of falling into place. But then there seemed to be this kind of back and forth between the lender's lawyer, our lawyer, and the title company, kind of just editing documents back and forth. But I don't know what's normal, but this was just an excessive amount of emails. It was hundreds and hundreds of emails in that last week of, I don't know. It was just very scary, very painful. And I'll even admit, I guess the scariest part was finally everything came through. And I think at 3 p.m. I was in Florida on vacation, and my partner says, Alex, do you think you could go send the wire? And it's on a Friday. And I said, well, what if they can't, see to me? What if they can't help us? Because it's, I had to drive, I think it was 45 minutes from where I was, and just kind of pray that someone at the bank could send me, could help me wire this money. Thankfully, very, very clutch. I really was very uncomfortable with how close that was. But just all these moving parts were just very, very stressful and very kind of down to the wire. And thankfully, we closed.
Something we learned with the wire. I mean, say down to the wire, but with wiring funds, when you're wiring large amounts, the banks go through extra caution to make sure there's no fraud. And if you're wiring, $1 million, it's almost like they're taking your first kid as, collateral until you can prove who you are. But anyway, that's also something that if you don't know is kind of shocking and surprising. But
so I think from now on we'll try not to close on Fridays. Make sure to get in there and kind of get that wire.
Know when the wire deadlines are. Most it's standard throughout the United States. I think it's 4 p.m. Eastern, but I don't remember what the wire deadline is. But you got to know what the wire deadline is when you're trying to get in. And you've got to get that wire into the escrow company, you know, in a certain amount of time for them to certify it to the title agency to, you know, to process the deed and whatnot. So it's always last minute. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter how many times you do it. It seems like it's always, oh, now we've got to wire funds. But anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I was always just so focused on the raising and finding a deal that I was just kind of shocked that in this case, closing was the hardest part. And maybe that's common as you get, you know, some inertia and you start to say, hey, finding a deal isn't so hard right now. Raising money is getting easier. I guess closing is still hard. I don't know how.
Yeah, I mean, it gets easier and you're able to forecast more and more, and you can you know certain things. I mean, here's something, a problem we had on our last closing. One of my partners is from India, and when we closed on the property, he was in India, and I didn't think about it, but U.S. banks don't accept Indian notaries, you know, and it was just something like, that's what held up the closing on this one, you know, was, you know, he's signing on the loan documents, but he can't get a notary, and this bank doesn't allow the video notaries, you know. So it ended up being that there's always something. And even though it was the 10th time we've closed on something and we thought we had everything lined up, it was just one thing that I didn't think of is, oh yeah, you know, and I just thought, oh yeah, he'll be able to find a notary there. I mean, they do know. I've notarized stuff overseas, you know, why can't he, you know? But yeah, there's typically something that pops up in the closing process. And even after 10 deals, there was still something that popped up that delayed us. And it was like, oh crap, you know, which meant the title company or the title attorney had to redo the closing statement. And I think we ended up having to do a second wire the next day for, you know, whatever the change in the the amount was. But anyway, we're running out of time, so let's wrap up. And a couple of quick questions to wrap up. You know, first question, what's next for you?
Well, you know, after closing on this second deal in January, I planned for it, and I was able to leave my job with the government. So now I'm a full-time real estate investor and real estate agent. And a big part of that was, it's not that I've got all this money coming in. Honestly, it's a leap of faith, because I felt a big sense of responsibility, like what I was saying. Now, you know, almost $2 million kind of I'm managing for people of other people's money. And I really want to be very hands-on. I really want to make sure it's successful. And it's, again, aligned with my goals, you know, but it's not like I have all this passive income coming in just yet. It's just successful so that we can get there. And so now I'm just kind of doubling down on what I've been doing. I'm going to continue to sell houses. I'm going to continue to find deals. And I've started a podcast called Screw the Stock Market. And it's essentially, hey, you know, that's one route you can go down, or here's another. And we look at different alternative investments. It's just kind of like-minded people, whether it's real estate or I've had note people come on the show, and it's just cool for networking. It's fun, you know. I'm sure you would agree. And I'm just kind of doubling down on what I've been doing. So I'm really excited. I get to get up every morning and I'm focused on the things that I'm most excited about, that I'm most passionate about. And I'm really loving life right now. So awesome.
So what advice would you give an aspiring investor that's trying to get their first deal closed?
What worked for me ended up being networking, right? And it's about kind of making sure you know what your strengths are and what you bring to the table. And it's hard when you're new because you're new. You don't necessarily have the specialized skill set in fundraising or analyzing or anything. So it's just be in the game and surround yourself with people who are like-minded, because it encourages you, it keeps you going. Like I said, I mean, I was shopping for years and I could have given up. And I think the big reason is that I networked and I just was motivated by the energy. I remember you were honestly the first in-person networking event I went to. You were the speaker. That was the first time we met in person.
That was Reston, Jason Stubblefield's event.
Yeah.
And remember that.
You know, I didn't know I was still years away from closing on a deal, but just that motivation to continue and kind of stay the course and see that other people are being successful at this is enough to keep you going. Because I think the biggest thing is falling off the wagon. So I'll say that that's my advice, and that's what worked for me.
Awesome. And I agree. Networking is a huge component in what we do in this industry, and especially for people getting their start. All right. Last question for you. How can listeners learn more about you?
Well, you can tune into the podcast. Again, Screw the Stock Market. We're on all those places wherever you get the podcast. You can follow me on LinkedIn, and then you can just call me or email me. I'll make sure to send my Calendly link so you can post it in the show notes and people can just connect. But I'm eager to connect. I'm eager to, one quick thing I'll point out is in real estate as an agent, right? One of the things that really was a mind shift for me was when I first realized that I had enough experience to be a mentor for newer agents. Yeah. And I still felt new, and I still don't feel like I'm like this millionaire agent but I still have enough experience that I can help someone who's 1 or 2 steps behind me. Yeah. And I can still take mentorship from people who are 1 or 2 steps ahead of me. And so, for whatever it's worth, I've closed 2 deals. I have some experience, and I'm happy to help anyone in any way that I can.
Love it. I love it. All right. Well, hey, thanks a lot for your time today, and very much enjoyed hearing your story, and best of luck to you. And hopefully we can hang out again and break bread again soon.
Definitely.
Hey, if you like that episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community, the Tribe of Titans, yet, you are missing out. So get yourself 30 days free by clicking the link below in the description, or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.